The firm that gifted Sadiq Khan free Taylor Swift tickets has won £45 million of City Hall contracts. The mayor has defended attendance at the pop star's Wembley gig as work. Some people have it lucky. And admits accepting more VIP tickets to watch Liverpool games, etc., etc. Now, if you marry this, Alex, with the fact that Lord Ali, of course, gave loads of freebies to not just Sir Keir Starmer, mainly Sir Keir Starmer, but several other members of the cabinet, and you also put in the fact that Dale Vince, the Ecotricity CEO, has been given approval of a massive solar farm on prime agricultural land. Of course, Labour's policy is to attack farms and see the sale of these farms. And they've just approved the solar farm by a man who's given £5 million to the Labour Party. All of these things, I would suggest, really add up to conflict of interest and, not being too clean, which is exactly everything that they could accuse the Conservative Party of being.
Yeah, well, it's the same as the establishment's party's been doing for decades, and the Tories are just as guilty, just as corrupt, just as crony. They have been before, and they will do it again if they're in power. I can guarantee you that. They gave and awarded billions of pounds of contracts when the Tories were in power to their friends and to their donors. So I don't want to let the Tories get off scot-free because, unfortunately, they're riddled with it as well. The reality is that governments like the Labour parties, before it got into power, pretended it was this moral sort of deity of a party, saying it would do better, it would hold government to transparency, to account. Sadiq Khan, of course, has been a prime example. If people have born and bred Londoners will know this, have lived in the city, have seen it get worse and worse progressively very, very quickly. Will know that Labour were never going to be any good coming into power because we've been experiencing it here for a very long period of time. But the reality is that this is the same old nonsense. It's handouts to your friends. And this goes back to the adage of power corrupting others. And it's one of the reasons why Donald Trump is such a breath of fresh air to America, because he cannot be bought. Nobody can buy Donald Trump. He's already wealthy. He doesn't need to be bought. His interest is in America. And I hate it when people get up on the soapbox about having wealthy people who are actually putting their name on the ballot, because I think those people are the less corruptible people because they've made their money. They don't need to be given handouts. What we've got, unfortunately, is a bunch of ideologues who have never made any money because they've never been in business and never been successful in business, particularly on the Labour benches. Look at the front bench, for example. They're all politicians from the get-go. And then they see a bit of their mates getting contracts and they go, well maybe we'll have a backhand.
On that point then, Alex, do any of you support what Dale Vince, the Labour donor, was saying? He's a massive net zero nut, by the way, and I think he's a very, very icky character. I don't like him at all. Total arse. But the fact of the matter is, he said, well, we can get around these allegations of conflict of interest, which one of our viewers, Dan, has just commented. He says, in the business world, conflict of interest is a big thing. How did government get away with it? Well, Dale Vince's solution for this was to have the taxpayer fund political parties, so that actually political parties don't have to rely on donor support to actually fund their operations.
I'm a bit unsure. I mean, I think it's important to show that there's a big contrast between the UK and the US. In the US, I think that is a huge problem, and that you cannot win an election in the US unless you have got loads of big firms giving you huge amounts of money who will want something in return. It very much stops you from doing what you might ordinarily do as a leader, because a lot of your legislation is just all pleasing all of these. So, for example, on the you know how we have five a day, and your information from the government on this is what you should eat. Like the boards in America that decide the recommendations for what people should eat are all filled with the big businessmen from like Coca-Cola and whatnot sat on the boards, who just try to get them to at the very least, dim down as far as possible the bad health effects of these things. And because they'll have funded campaigns and whatnot, they kind of have to do this stuff. So it's very different to the US. I think that definitely
Chloe, that's true,
it's an
but it's
issue in
also
the UK.
it's
But I
also
think
true, but it's also not true because Donald Trump actually had less donors than
Yeah.
Democrats who got billions, and all the big tech companies really were against Trump. They were for Kamala up until they realized
And she still ended up in debt.
And now you've got the health secretary being confirmed today, which is going to be Robert Kennedy, who is going to put an end to all of those sorts of things. So I think it's true, but it depends on. That's why I said you need that strong leader who can't be bought before the election. And I think that's the problem. It's politicians that are bought, not parties.
That's an interesting. Connie, where are you at?
I mean,
on
I
that?
think it's changing to a degree in that, for example, with social media, Trump was able to have some really viral moments for the cost of little to nothing, like that McDonald's stint, which, didn't really cost him anything, going far more viral than the paid adverts that Kamala Harris was putting out. So I think things are changing, but I think in the UK, it's nowhere near as bad. And I think we can have donors rather than the taxpayer having to foot the bill if there are appropriate safeguards and restrictions put in place. Maybe those need to be looked at and reviewed.
And ultimately, the trade unions fund the Labour Party, and then the trade unions get to hold the Labour Party to account in putting in really quite restrictive workers' rights policies that end up hampering the economy. And then the train driver's been a totally perfect one where they hold the nation ransom. So maybe that would solve these issues as well. I don't know. Connie, sorry, that was to Connie.
Sorry, I'm really not sure about this, to be honest. I understand it. Obviously, on the face of it, it's unfair that certain parties are going to have a massive advantage if they have huge donors, and typically it's going to be parties who are championing the economy and businesses and reducing taxes that are going to get donations from big companies that don't want to be taxed. But then again, like you say, left-wing parties are more likely going to have the donations from trade unions. But I really do not feel comfortable with the idea of the taxpayer funding parties having to. I don't know how that would necessarily work, whether they'd all get, I assume they'd all get an equal share, but that wouldn't stop the issue of donations. I don't know whether that would be like a one or the other option. Every party's funded by the taxpayer for their campaigns, as well as having their donations, or
I think it would mean that political parties would have to ration their voter reach in order to meet whatever the donation is from the taxpayer, whatever the cap is rather from the taxpayer. Because let's be honest, it's not going to be a lot of money because we ain't got any, and the Treasury will want to penny pinch. So you'll end up seeing that certain voters can't be targeted because political parties don't have the money to do that, and I think that is fundamentally anti-democratic. So
you'd never get parties like Reform coming through the ranks because you wouldn't get funding.
Exactly.
So
they'd probably base it off the number of seats you got at the last election, right?
And
it's not like they're going. It's not like they're going to give the Greens the same amount of money as the Labour Party to campaign. They would have to give They would have to give more money to some party than others, and the only way for them to decide that would be they're not going to say, look at the polls. I highly doubt they would look at the polls that in real time and adjust the donations accordingly. I don't see how it would work well.
And let's be honest, the Labour Party would put in so many restrictions for access to this cash. You've got to not be a far-right party. Well, we're all far-right to Sir Keir Starmer, so none of us are getting elected.